Hello, RSA 2021. Does seem more than a year since certainly the 2020 edition of RSA. I'm Raj Samani. I'm a chief scientist and fellow at McAfee, and today I'm joined by John.
Hi, my name is John Fokker, principal engineer and head of cyber investigations at McAfee.
So today we're going to be talking about ransomware, and I know, like, for some there may be an eye roll. I guess it's like, oh well, we've heard about ransomware before, but I guess, John, it's not like it was a couple of years back. And if you remember, it was consumers being hit for like $300. We can't even call it like the same category anymore, can we?
No, you're absolutely right. And as the title explains, it's a new recipe for an old dish. It seemed a couple of years back, I recall we had a presentation on ransomware as well, where we said it was dead and it resurrected. And at that time, we thought, well, it cannot be more refined or more impactful than it is then. But, well, here we are again. And it's actually gotten much worse.
Yeah, I think for me, I think where it really changed was, I think it was like 2016, we saw like the SamSam crew, remember when they were going after hospitals? And actually, I think it was 2016, actually, because it was early 2016, because following SamSam, you then had the kind of introduction of the GandCrab crew, and then all of a sudden things started to change. And then, of course, the Riot gang came in and just amped it up. So it is a new recipe. I don't know, maybe it's not an old dish, but I guess we can debate that later on. So actually, I'm going to let you kick off and really kind of talk about what is the ransomware recipe today.
Yes. So in order to understand what is actually happening today, I think it's good to take everybody along on something that happened in the past and build it up from there, so we can see what actually is tweaked in the ingredients. So when we look at ransomware as a service, we discussed this similar slide 2 years ago, where normally you have ransomware admins and developers. So those are individuals that build the framework. The names you see now, the headline names with the naming and shaming sites, those are cyber criminals, organized crime criminals that offer a complete framework to suit extortion. And that's what it is, extortion. And what we often see with the ransomware as a service are affiliates, are people that are partnering up. And this is not something new. We saw this in 2014, and we'll show examples later on. And these are individuals that are actually spreading the ransomware. They are making or creating the infections. They pay the sum to the developers. Either they buy themselves in or have to prove themselves. There's some kind of exchange in order to get a ransomware sample, get the build, as they call it. And these folks go out and they infect. And in the old days, what we saw in 2014 and now on a lesser degree, you see a lot of exploit kits, a lot of spam runs, a lot of botnet traffic, and all those things. And they created, in the past, don't mind you, already millions of victims. So this was the recipe that was valid then. But as a good chef, you're always looking, how can I tweak stuff? How's the outcome different? So why and how did we turn up to become such a big problem that it is now? Well, when we look at the outcome, we had regular victims here. That could be individuals, your personal pictures, consumers. But that surely changed over time into more organizations, complete companies. You see the headline news on larger companies. So what did change in this mix, in these three pillars? Well, we can explain it to you in the next slides, but to hint a little bit, we believe that there is a difference in the type of affiliates. No longer is it spam mail or exploit kits. No, these are organized crime groups that have skills in pen testing. And that is one of the most things that we see. So I love a movie analogy, and I know, Raj, you're a big fan of Rocky. Well, I'm a big fan of Rambo. So yeah, in the old days when we talked about CTB Locker and Crypto Wall, we talk a lot about spray and pray. So I use Rambo with his M16 machine gun. And nowadays it's a bit different. They're more organized, they're laser focused, they know exactly which target to focus on, and they compromise it completely back to front. And this is interesting because the spray and pray was targeting all your mom and pop shops, the smaller entities, your maybe family members. You get that email, and now they try to stay under the radar and they completely infect complete organizations. But mind you, these were not the admins doing that work. It are the affiliates. So that is what changed. And I don't know, Raj, do you remember this advertisement?
Yeah, I guess we've seen this kind of sales model coming back. I think this was 2014. So it's interesting to see how things have fundamentally shifted and changed. But yes, interesting how CTB Locker and everything kind of was the precursor to things.
Yeah, and CTB Locker was one of the first ransomwares that were actually doing an as-a-service framework. They really designed it from the get-go. And it was not still, it was before the same type of attacks, the targeted attacks, you said, the big game phishing. But it was interesting to see. This individual, we believe that the moniker Tapkin is the one behind CTB Locker, the developer or the admin, is actively recruiting individuals and asking for more. Well, the emphasis is on that people can spread, they can spray, they can have a botnet, they can create infections. Nowhere in this advertisement are they actually asking, like, okay, do you want to focus on companies? Do you want to focus on complete penetration, Metasploit framework, things like that? It's purely based on spray and pray. How different is it than if we take this advertisement, and this is unknown? And we believe that this is the individual that's affiliated with SonarKey ReEvil ransomware. They're both job postings. However, they're asking for a different type of individual. So in this case, there's less slots. Slots are the places where you can set up, where you can partner for. So he offers 4 partner seats. And they're actually looking for people who are confident with NAS, with tape backups, with Metasploit framework, Kodiak, Cobalt Strike, and have a really, really good knowledge of the Active Directory and Hyper-V. So you see that there is a big change going on, and they're focusing more on organizations or like companies.
Let's just rewind for a second, because that's a lot of information. Yeah. And a lot of people will kind of who may not do this, I guess, routinely, may well get confused with the terminology that we're using. But effectively, when we talk about affiliates, when we talk about ransomware groups, when we talk about things like attribution, I'd argue that the majority of the industry fundamentally get it wrong, right? So, like, for example, we read stories that in the United Kingdom, for example, one of the largest travel bureaus, companies that do allow people to exchange money, they were hit by, actually, with Sodinokibi, right?
Correct.
And all that we saw in the press was Sodinokibi hits company, Ryuk hits company this, and I think fundamentally when we hear about, like whether it was Netwalker or whatever the ransomware variant of the time, it fundamentally fails to understand the business model behind the way that they work. So in other words, like historically, we'd always say, well, between the perpetrator and the victim, there was a one-to-one relationship. In other words, the perpetrator carries out an attack on victim. But that model has changed fundamentally. And I think ransomware is, and certainly the affiliate schemes is a really good example of that, because, it's not the person that developed the ransomware. Actually, they outsourced the attack to a third party. And that third party is the one that came after you. They're the ones that selected to target you. And, later on, we'll discuss the reason why. But how they got employed was dependent today upon their capability or understanding of corporate networks. So in other words, And I think this is the scary part, where it's not a really, really good developer going out and figuring out how to target companies. No, what they're doing is they're basically outsourcing it to people that understand corporate networks and are then going out and compromising them. So, I mean, I guess you could say that it's a profession. It's professionalized more than it's ever been. Would you agree with that? I mean, I guess that's kind of what we're saying here, right?
Totally. And from both sides, we're talking about affiliates now, but it's also branding. It is like you said, the headline news, the riot or the ReEvil or the GAN crap hits a large organization. It instills fear in the next victims that they make. And is what drives that framework behind the ransomware. But in all honesty, if you are a competent affiliate or pen tester, you would do it with BitLocker or any type of encryption method would be suffice. However, they team up with this framework because it facilitates that whole process on the back end of the data exfiltration. It is the extortion platform where you can communicate, and it's that fear factor. Very much so. It's like, it is a recipe that's often copied. What you see here are actually the official job postings of other ransomware families you might have heard in the news. We've done extensive research on Lockbit, ReEvil, Netwalker, Phobos is there as well. And they more or less offer the same type of description. They tell you something about their ransomware and eventually how they set it up. They show that they mean business, that they're trustworthy on the forum that they advertise, because these are all forum discussions. And then they say, well, you can join us, and we're looking for people with skill set X, Y, and Z, and these are the potential payouts. These are the modern job postings for cyber criminals. If you want to be successful and cyber criminals that are skilled enough and that want to make a lot of money, they go after these job postings.
Yeah, I mean, the other important part is the affiliates is where the value is, I guess. In other words, having a strong affiliate program is what makes the ransomware successful. I mean, it doesn't. Okay. So let me call it out. I will say, if you look at the percentage wise, it doesn't really matter how good the ransomware is itself. I mean, of course, it does matter to make sure that it can't be decrypted without if it's buggy and so forth. But fundamentally, the reason why REvil or /Sodinokibi has been so successful, and I know we're going to get into this by the way, but it's because they understand how to recruit top quality affiliates. That's the reason we're seeing the growth in ransomware. And of course the fact that people are paying because the affiliates are so good and they're able to compromise large enterprises and make it, so damn powerful because you've got to pay because they've taken out your entire environment. So that's why it happens. And I think, John, and I know we're going to get into this, but if you look at something like Netwalker, the Netwalker team, it's like it clicked, right? It was around about March of this year, not this year, last year. I've lost a year. All right, yeah, 2020. Yeah.
We all lost a year.
Yeah, it's kind of disappeared, right? But in March 2020, where the Netwalker crew just kind of turned around and said, well, hey, look, how can we make more money? Well, let's have a look at what everybody else is doing. And of course, that's when they fundamentally shifted and changed. And so all of this is this is why we're seeing such a growth in ransomware. It was there before, but now it's like critical scale, really.
True. And that's a valid point. There's with all four of these advertisements, the affiliates could be exchanged and you would still have a successful affiliate and that would still target large organizations. That being said, we do realize and we do identify that there are certain growth factors in play. Like you mentioned with Netwalker, they changed a little bit in their system, opened it up to a little bit more people, professionalized, automated certain things. And that kind of paved the way. They looked at ReEvil, they looked at all the other ones, and that kind of paved the way to the larger successes. Raj, why don't we pivot? We're talking a little bit about the affiliates, but I think our viewers would be interested in like, okay, what takes place and how does the targeting takes place? How do these new chefs find their new ingredients? So there's always been a healthy interest in corporate networks, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the new, what we see as like quite common used methods of entry, and we're probably going to mention RDP.
That was the first one I was going to come up with, actually. Well, actually, I think interestingly, if you look at recent analysis from the likes of Coveware, I mean, historically, RDP was always the number one most common entry vector for corporate networks related to ransomware attacks. And I think that's just dipped now, but effectively, RDP is the open door to a network. And you know, ironically, and I know we'll talk about how they get RDP creds, but fundamentally, every organization and every person listening to this, go and scan your network, and certainly from outside, to determine whether there's anything open with 3389. That, like, it's if you don't do that, then it really is just a matter of time.
Correct. And I think one thing that's on the list that we mentioned as well, and we go into that a little bit later as well, is info stealers, commodity malware, especially with a lot of people working from home now, and not always being, well, we're all security professionals, but we can understand that not every company has a level of security, and they're happy that they have Office 365 and they can work in the cloud, but without multi-factor authentication. And basically the info stealers, it's small malware, wasn't always considered very dangerous, but it is very effective in stealing your passwords. And we know that the ransomware gangs are buying these logs en masse just to find those corporate credentials. They're digging, literally sifting for gold through all the mud just to find that one organization that they can breach from that way. Well, another one is phishing, I guess, the age-old one, either laced with malware or not. But
it still works. You know, we've dealt with, actually, I remember within the last sort of 12 months, we've been dealing with phishing attacks, which have been, and actually leveraging and utilizing kind of COVID themes as a vehicle to get inside corporate networks. And of course, in that particular instance, they then drop ransomware in the environment. So still there, still works. People still click on links. And so we have to anticipate for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Another one we saw is commodity malware. I think a lot of the security professionals saw the Emotet takedown, which is a great success by law enforcement. And Emotet was a loader malware that infected a lot of individuals through phishing, actually, and leveraged a platform which they then sold access to all these systems to other cyber criminals. And we see something similar happening with other families right now. And I think for us, if we look back at Q4 from 2020, wasn't it, Raj? There's a lot of these groups are very proficient in exploiting public-facing applications. So you might trust your VPN provider, and there would be an exploit in that or a vulnerability, and it's the turnover time for them to exploit this has been crazy. It's been much faster than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and I think with, you know, when you've got a list of public-facing applications, based on the last couple of weeks, you probably want to put Exchange on there with DearCry. Okay, I'll speak English once. DearCry and Black Kingdom, but of course, you know, there are other variants that are popping up, just leveraging this proxy logon issue, and of course, you know, it shows you. Well, actually, I think it re-emphasizes the need for strong cyber hygiene. Above all else, the best line of defense is strong hygiene, which is a lot of the fundamental steps required, I think, is the first line of defense.
Yeah, totally. It's but it's also, there's so much money that exploits that are normally quite costly are pocket change for a lot of these groups now. So they have the financial resources, and quite often more resources than many organizations. But still, pivoting back to our trusty old RDP, some of the stuff we saw. We highlight a couple of these tools that we saw in the wild. We actually ran a honeypot network, and we saw the criminals trying to break in, and they tried to pivot within our honeypot network, and they downloaded another tool called NL Brute, and they tried to use that to brute force other systems that we created in our fictitious little network. Another one, this is an underground tool, heavily advertised on the forums, and there's an individual that's offering this, and it's a specialized tool also for RDP cracking. It's RDP Brute, and the license is for only individuals, so it's like for cyber criminals, a vouching system. So they really like this piece of software. Does the job, but yeah, if you're not skilled enough. There's the Amazon of RDP shops, I guess. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. Was that your daughter that looked up a company within like minutes on this site, Raj?
Yeah, she's done a couple. And it's remarkable, 1, 2, 3. Ironically, I think the most common password that we found being sold on these underground forums was null. Like, in other words, no password.
Yeah.
And
one could think that it's a VM that somebody spun up and it's just for testing and all these things, but far too often we do our own scanning, or there's a system that has a local admin account with no password, and somebody just wants to set up a database to test out something new, and they do use a corporate credential, and then all harm is already done. So it's
and look, we're not out there like shaming users or what that's not the objective here. Like, here's the reality. RDP is one of the most common entry vectors for ransomware, but actually it's used by all sorts of kind of bad guys out there.
True.
If you are using RDP, or even if you're not using RDP, continuously scan, from the outside in, like scan your network routinely and figure out what you have that's 3389, but also, and we said here, test the password. I mean, you'd be surprised how many IR incidents we deal with, and it was precipitated by a password that's on this screen.
Yep. Totally. And one piece of advice that I might give is multi-factor authentication. That is, I think, a very effective blocker in stopping a lot of these attacks in their tracks when they do try to get access. But it's not always that they have to scan themselves for RDP. There is and that's probably fueled with the outlook on tremendous amounts of cash. There's a real market for initial access brokers, as we might call it. So we collected some stuff from the underground, and we see cyber criminals offering complete companies for sale. And funny enough, if you read this advertisement, they are a bit cryptic with the description. So they won't tell you exactly what company it is, because they realize that law enforcement and the security, professionals as we are scanning these sources too. But still, it's this individual NetNet is offering a company in consumer goods with a revenue of $3 billion. And he has VPN accounts, and this is how we often see it. This is the initial stage that leads to that headline that a large organization got breached by ransomware.
We actually, and I know a lot, we kind of touched on the price of ransomware demands, and historically it was a couple of $100. There was one 2 weeks ago that I think was 50 million. And actually, it's posts like these that really demonstrate why they're able to demand so much. I mean, look, they can charge, or they can quote $7,500, but actually they make $3 billion. And so, to the ransomware affiliate that's going out and conducting the attack, for them it's they just do the numbers and go, well, if they make 3 billion, I can charge them certainly more than a few hundred. And I think that's part of the reason why they've been, well, the fact that they're going after corporate networks and the fact that corporate networks are so accessible and easy to get access to, and they make such a huge amount of money, gives them confidence that they can go in and charge like $50 million.
True. And it's not only from the face value, because a lot of these companies that have been breached, they're not as well known, the majority. But what we've noticed is that a lot of these cyber criminals are actually using business intelligence tools, legitimate business intelligence tools like ZoomInfo, and there's some others, in order to determine what the net value of that company is. The revenue, they know the board, the senior executives, all kinds of things. So for instance, we have ASML in this case. So they use business intelligence tools. And this is scary to me because from where I go, it's, okay, this is to determine the value of a company, but you don't only determine the value of the company, you know who the senior execs are. And I'm often shocked by how much information is actually available through these means. And it's quite easy to determine the ransom demand in combination with being inside your network and seeing the actual figures. But also, it's child's play to contact the executives directly. And if I recall well, there was an interview with Unknown, the individual behind the REvil ransomware, and he was saying the exact same thing. It's like our next step is going to be, we're going to ring up the executive of this company or the CEO, and we're going to tell him some juicy details and that he needs to pay up.
Yeah, and actually I took a call a couple of weeks back, and John, I think you probably remember, from a CEO of an organization worth, or making billions of dollars. And they got direct access to the CEO. I mean, it was a CEO that called me and said, I've got a ticking clock, and they said they're going to publish everything within 48 hours. What do I do? And so I guess it kind of reemphasizes, because we've had these discussions in the past. Is cyber on the board agenda? And, we're all sick of those surveys. But it is without doubt at that level, because that's who the bad guys are going after. They're the ones that are being contacted, and it's the high, it's the C-level executives at these companies that are having to kind of determine what they do with not just their data being encrypted, but also the publication of business confidential information. And I think that's causing a lot of conflict, I think, within organizations today, really.
Totally agree. And I think the last one of the initial access fixes that we have seen and we observed a sharp rise, especially since last year, is the use of commodity malware. So we listed a couple of the commodity malware here. And this is what we see on a daily basis. A lot of advertisements saying, well, I have thousands of logs, and we're open to selling our logs, and you can use them to allocate or find the credentials that you need in order to infect the company. So there's specific tools for this. This is another example. And here's a screenshot of one of the tools that somebody actually shared, and they showed that the amount of accounts that they had from the countries, the type of environment that they were actually infecting, and also the password count if they pulled it from the browser, if there were FTP credentials, VPN credentials, RDP. It is child's play. So this is something that, especially given COVID, people are working from home. The IT security is less spread out across all the devices, and they're quite of a challenge in playing catch up. This is something that we've been saying for the last year. Is something to keep an eye out for. Don't underestimate that commodity malware infection that might be, but really take your precautions in this. But I want to pivot because we have to be mindful of the time as well. Raj, $1 million business, isn't it? I think you said a little bit about that, about the research that we did in the beginning of the talk.
Yeah, I think GandCrab kind of, I guess were the first ones to really be a little bit open about the money that they were making. I mean, I think they claimed $2 billion. I don't know if I believe that, but the one thing that we do know is that fundamentally people are paying. And whereas in the past, I think we've been quite successful with, the hashtag don't pay and, really emphasizing people not to pay. Large companies are paying and paying huge sums of money because they can no longer operate. And I think there was a large, or at least one large company that actually confirmed that they paid just a couple of weeks back as well. And so absolutely. And actually, ironically, it's even affiliates are making huge sums of money from actually being part of these particular activities.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny enough, it's if you look at conventional criminals, they post with an expensive watch or a nice car. Some cyber criminals do that as well, but often they will post a transaction ID. That's what we're looking at right now. And it's a Bitcoin transaction ID of the earnings that this individual made in one weekend. So obviously, as a researcher, we dove into this and we mapped out the whole infrastructure. And we could actually confirm that this individual, based on the transaction IDs, made about 300K in a weekend. Well, that's not a bad paycheck, and that's quite worrisome. And at the time, we worked it out that this individual by himself already probably made around $4.5 million US. And this was quite a while back, and this individual has not stopped. So it's still going on. And we could see that money is going to Bitcoin mixers where they obfuscate the origin in order to launder it so they can use it for other purposes. But also we see it flowing into underground drug markets. So like you said, don't pay. Something you need to realize is that you're not only paying the criminal, but you're fueling other forms of crime indirectly as well.
Yeah, and I'd recommend the Europol Serious Organized Crime Threat Assessment report from 2021. And that report actually is insightful because it actually talks about markets that OCGs are actually operating in. And clearly, one area of focus by these organized criminal gangs is cybercrime. And so I think the perception of, lone wolf working in his mother's basement, like we have to put that to one side now. So John, I know we are almost up against time, and like as ever, we could probably spend a couple of hours talking about this. I mean, maybe if we go through the trends, but also like what should people actually be doing and looking out for?
That's a good thing. We spend about 35 minutes or 30 minutes scaring the living daylights out of people. So it's good if we give them some help. One of the things that I do want to touch upon that we saw the trend is the data leak. So it's no longer just encrypting your data. They're exfiltrating large amounts of sensitive data or personal identity or PII and posting it online. So what you see here, these are other sites of Locker, I think Suncrypt, and that's REvil, and they're posting it on a website. And individuals it's naming and shaming. It's basically another technique to emphasize the extortion, to put more impact and leverage. And when we're not publicly reporting on each and every victim, but as a security company, we do take note of, okay, what's the type of industry, who are targeted? And then we do see that a lot of companies that are dependent on manufacturing, so basically the conveyor belt stops, or even companies that are, so we can say that like they're relying on the availability of their services versus law firms or finance where they're dealing with confidential information, are some very juicy targets for these criminals. And that's something that we saw predominantly from end of 2019, I think, all over 2020. And now it's like, if you don't do this, you're not a hip and happening type of ransomware, apparently. One of the new things that we also saw was denial of service. So if you are a company that is targeted and you have a website that you rely on for income, we do see cyber criminals trying to go after that, just as an extra means of enforcing their extortion, in conjunction with what we already said about the CEOs being targeted through business intelligence. But I think there's some stuff and there's some happy stuff that we can say that, yeah, it's a hard fight, but we are continuously fighting back. We're not only on the sidelines looking and seeing what happens. So I think this year is the 5th year, isn't it, for No More Ransom?
Right.
So yeah, McAfee helped create a public-private portal. It's a public-private initiative at no cost. It's the #1 portal in the world for free decryption tools. So where the public sector and the private sector come together to help victims of ransomware. There's more than 4.2 million visitors, and I'm pretty sure those stats are going to be more and more. But in the last 4 years, when they were online, they saved over 632 million US dollars that did not fall in criminal hands. Do they have a decryptor for any type of version? I don't think so, but they do have a lot of decryptors. And if you can spare the time, I would say if you can allow it for the third option for waiting until a decryptor comes in available, I would very, very much advise that to do. And then I think GandCrab was a really, really big success. There was a demonstration that it was actually possible to find the keys for one of those newer versions. Wasn't it, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, there's over 100 plus variants that there are decryptors for, over 150 partners, and you don't have to give your email address. We don't track your IP. You've got, free decryptors. You've got something that will tell you the form of ransomware you've been hit by, or give you prevention advice. I mean, it even gives you somewhere you can actually report the crime to law enforcement.
Correct.
And nobody's made a cent out of this. And actually, more importantly, the money hasn't gone to crime.
Correct. And that's it has proven to be a successful within its boundaries. You try to hurt them where you try to hit them where it hurts the most, and that's in their wallets.
Exactly.
I
don't know if we've got the time to go through that video, but I mean, it's a shame. But look, here's what we'd say. John and I will give our contact details at the end of it. We've actually got some videos we can show you about where raids were done against criminal gangs and stuff. So there's a lot more that we wish we had more time to go through. But I mean, look, fundamentally, if you're sitting and watching this particular talk thinking, well, maybe I need to do something, like please start immediately. The bad guys are super, super active right now. And, I love the first one, back up, but we cannot stress the importance of going through preventative advice.
That's totally true. These are some of the advices, and it's like, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it is backups, multi-factor authentication, so robust identity management, keeping your software, security software, AV software up to date, making sure you not only have AV, but you detect other forms of intrusion as well. We have some first aid tips. So if you are infected and disconnect from the internet, if you can create a memory dump, do that. That's maybe a little bit forensic. Take photos, make copies of the encrypted drive. Try to recover tools with PhotoRec. There's certain tools. There's FireRands that don't encrypt the whole file and only a small portion, so you can get stuff back. If you can, do not reboot the computer, because that will erase any keys that are in memory. Check out No More Ransom for a possible decryptor. And there is no try. This is a very complicated situation when you're in it. And even though we say do not pay, if you do decide to pay, because that's a business discussion, you should also accept the risk of losing everything, because you're not dealing with a professional. Well, it seems professional, but they're not professional software developers. There's no guarantee on the software or the decryptor that they're going to give you. So it might actually make things worse. And don't trust the word of a criminal. So if they say to delete your data, well, don't believe them on their word, because once on the internet, always on the internet.
And really, to kind of wrap up, I know, John, we put our contact details there, so feel free to connect with John and myself. We've only just scratched the surface, And we routinely publish a lot of really deep technical content and analysis, but also guidance around protecting yourself. John, it's been a pleasure. RSA has changed. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.